The morning of judgment. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Rosewood Manor, with the particular cruelty reserved for days one wished would never dawn. Princess Marianne stood before the mirror in her chambers, watching her lady's maid, Agnes, attempt the impossible, making her presentable for court. Higher, perhaps? Agnes suggested, her voice carefully neutral as she adjusted the elaborate coiffure that added precious inches to Marianne's diminutive frame. It won't help. Marianne's reflection stared back at her. Pale skin, dark eyes too large for her face, and a stature that had been the subject of whispered mockery since her 16th birthday. At 22, Princess Marianne of Rosewood stood barely 5 feet tall, a fact that had transformed her from a promising royal match into a diplomatic embarrassment. Today, she would face the court of Valmont for the first time since her betrothal to Crown Prince Theodore had been announced 6 months prior. A betrothal she had never requested, a marriage arranged by her father, King Edmund, in a desperate bid to save Rosewood from financial collapse. Your Highness, the gown arrived from the modiste. Agnes gestured toward the bed where a creation of pale blue silk lay waiting, high-waisted in the latest fashion, with delicate embroidery that must have cost more than Agnes earned in a year. Marianne allowed herself to be dressed, each layer of silk and lace feeling like armor she didn't know how to wear. The gown was beautiful, expertly tailored to create the illusion of height, but no amount of clever stitching could change what she was. Too short, too plain, too inadequate for a prince who had been raised on tales of legendary beauties. Father wishes to see you before the carriages depart. Agnes's words were soft, but Marianne heard the warning beneath them. She found King Edmund in his study, surrounded by ledgers that told the story of Rosewood's ruin more clearly than any words could. Her father had aged a decade in the 2 years since her mother's death, his hair now entirely gray, his shoulders permanently stooped beneath the weight of crown and crisis. Marianne. He didn't look up from the papers. You understand what today represents? Yes, father. She kept her voice steady. I am to be presented to Prince Theodore and the Valmont court. The betrothal will be formally acknowledged. More than that. Now he did look at her, and the desperation in his eyes made her throat tighten. This alliance is Rosewood's salvation. The Valmont treasury will cover our debts. Their army will secure our borders, but only if this marriage proceeds. I understand my duty. Do you? He stood, crossing to where she stood by the window. Theodore is particular. He has rejected 3 betrothals before this. The Valmont Dowager, Queen Isolde, has made it clear this is his final chance to choose appropriately, or she will choose for him. And he chose me. Marianne couldn't keep the bitter edge from her voice, or rather, his mother chose me because Rosewood is desperate enough to accept any terms. Marianne, I know what I am, father. I know what the court will see when I arrive. A short, plain princess from a bankrupt kingdom, presented like a merchant's daughter at auction. She turned to face him fully. But I also know that Rosewood needs this alliance. So I will go. I will smile. I will curtsy. And I will not shame you. Something flickered in her father's expression. Pride, perhaps, or grief. Your mother would have been proud of your courage. Mother would have advised me to grow taller. The attempt at levity fell flat. The journey to Valmont took 3 hours by carriage, each mile bringing Marianne closer to a future she couldn't envision. Agnes sat across from her, working embroidery with fingers that never faltered, while Marianne watched the countryside transform from Rosewood's gentle hills to Valmont's more dramatic terrain, dark forests and steep valleys that seemed to mirror her own apprehension. They say the king is recently widowed, Agnes offered, breaking the heavy silence. King Dominic. They call him the strongest ruler in 3 generations. I'm not marrying the king. I'm marrying his son. Yes, but they say the king holds the real power in Valmont. That Prince Theodore is scholarly by comparison. Marianne had heard the rumors. King Dominic, widowed 5 years ago when his queen died in a riding accident. A warrior king who had expanded Valmont's borders through strategic brilliance and, some whispered, ruthless force. A man of absolute authority and commanding presence. And Theodore, his only heir, was said to be his opposite, scholarly, refined, more interested in art than governance, which should have made him perfect for Marianne, a gentle match for a gentle princess. Except nothing about this felt gentle. The Valmont Palace materialized through the trees like something from a dark fairy tale. All gray stone and soaring towers, built to intimidate rather than welcome. Guards in black and silver livery lined the approach, and courtiers in elaborate dress dotted the gardens like exotic birds. Marianne's carriage stopped before the main entrance. She took a breath, adjusted her posture, and prepared to step into her future. The door opened. A footman in pristine livery extended his hand, and then she heard it. The whispers that would define her introduction to Valmont Court. Is that her? So small, like a child playing dress-up. Theodore must be devastated. Marianne lifted her chin, descended the carriage steps with as much grace as she could summon, and walked into the palace that would either become her home or her cage. She had survived her mother's death. She had survived her kingdom's collapse. She could survive this. The throne room doors opened before her, and Princess Marianne of Rosewood stepped forward to meet her fate. The rejection. The throne room of Valmont Palace was designed to humble. Vaulted ceilings stretched so high they disappeared into shadow, and columns of black marble lined a central aisle that seemed to stretch for miles. At the far end, 2 thrones sat elevated on a dais, one occupied, one empty, King Dominic. Even from this distance, Marianne could feel the weight of his presence. He sat with the stillness of a predator, dressed entirely in black save for the silver crown that rested on dark hair threaded with gray. His face was all sharp angles and stern lines, and when his gaze fixed on her, she felt it like a physical force. To his right stood a younger man, Prince Theodore, she assumed. Tall, fair-haired, handsome in a delicate way that reminded her of painted porcelain. He wore silk and velvet in shades of cream and gold, and his expression as he watched her approach was one of barely concealed distaste. The courtiers lined both sides of the aisle, a gauntlet of jewels and judgment. Marianne kept her eyes forward, her steps measured, her spine straight despite the trembling in her legs. She reached the dais and executed a perfect curtsy, years of training overriding her fear. Your Majesty, Your Highness, silence, the kind that pressed against eardrums and made breath feel stolen. Rise, King Dominic commanded. His voice was deep, controlled, and utterly lacking in warmth. Marianne stood, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Ice-gray eyes assessed her with the clinical precision of a man evaluating livestock. She watched something flicker in his expression. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. Princess Marianne of Rosewood. He spoke her name as if testing its weight. You are smaller than reported. Heat flooded her cheeks. Around the room, she heard the rustle of fans, the whisper of silk, as courtiers leaned toward each other. I am as God made me, Your Majesty. Indeed. His attention shifted to his son. Theodore? The prince descended the dais with the reluctance of a man approaching his execution. Up close, he was beautiful, all golden curls and refined features, but his eyes when they met hers were cold. Princess Marianne. He didn't offer his hand. I had hoped the portraits were inaccurate. The words hit like a slap. Marianne heard the collective intake of breath from the assembled courtiers, felt the weight of their pity and their glee. The portraits were accurate, Your Highness. I apologize if reality disappoints. Disappointment implies expectations. Theodore's voice carried across the throne room with perfect acoustical clarity. I had none. This betrothal was arranged by necessity, not desire. My mother assured me you would be suitable for the alliance. She said nothing of suitability for anything else. Marianne's nails bit into her palms. I understand I am not what you hoped for. You misunderstand. Theodore cut her off with the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I had no hopes. I have 3 requirements for a wife. She must be of appropriate rank, she must be capable of producing heirs, and she must understand that this marriage is a political arrangement. Nothing more. His gaze traveled over her with clinical assessment. You meet the first requirement. The second remains to be seen. As for the third, do you understand, princess? This will be a marriage of duty. You will have your title, your position, your allowances, but do not expect affection, companionship, or any of the pretty illusions young ladies entertain about matrimony. The throne room had gone utterly silent. Even the whispers had stopped. Marianne felt something cold settle in her chest. Not quite grief, not quite rage. Something harder. I understand perfectly, Your Highness. Her voice didn't waver. I too have requirements. I require respect. I require courtesy. And I require that if you intend to treat me as a broodmare, you at least have the decency not to do so in front of 300 witnesses. Gasps. Actual, audible gasps. Theodore's eyes narrowed. You forget yourself. No. The word came from the throne. King Dominic had risen, and the sheer presence of him silenced the room more effectively than any shout. She remembers herself quite well. He descended the dais with measured steps, each footfall echoing in the vast space. When he reached them, Marianne realized he was taller than Theodore by several inches, broader in the shoulders, and infinitely more imposing. This close, she could see the lines of his face, harsh, weathered, marked by years of command and conflict. Theodore. The king's voice held a warning. You have insulted a royal guest in my hall. Apologize. Father, I merely stated, apologize. The single word carried such absolute authority that Theodore flinched. For a moment, Marianne thought he might refuse, might escalate this public humiliation into something even more catastrophic. But then he sketched the shallowest of bows. My apologies, princess, if my honesty offended. It wasn't an apology at all, and everyone knew it. King Dominic's jaw tightened. He turned to Marianne, and she saw something unexpected in those ice-gray eyes. Not pity, but something closer to respect. Princess Marianne, you have traveled far and endured much today. Allow my staff to show you to your chambers. We will speak again this evening. He paused, then added in a voice pitched for her ears alone, You did not deserve that. Before she could respond, he turned and strode from the room, courtiers parting before him like water before the prow of a ship. Theodore followed without a backward glance, and Marianne stood alone in the center of the throne room, surrounded by whispers and stares, knowing that she had just been publicly rejected by the man she was meant to marry. Agnes appeared at her elbow, solid and real in a world that had turned to nightmare. Come, Your Highness, let us get you away from here. Marianne allowed herself to be guided through corridors that blurred together. Upstairs she didn't count, into chambers she barely saw. Only when the door closed and she was alone did she let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She sank onto the edge of an ornate bed and pressed her hands to her face. She had been rejected, publicly cruelly, front of everyone who mattered, and there was no escape. The betrothal contracts were signed. Rosewood needed this alliance. She was trapped in an engagement to a man who had looked at her like she was defective merchandise. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. Your Highness? Agnes's voice, gentle and worried. May I come in? Yes. Agnes entered carrying tea service and a surprising guest, a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed in deep purple, with silver hair and shrewd dark eyes. Princess Marianne, this is Lady Beatrice, the Dowager Duchess of Ashford. She has asked to call on you. The older woman settled into a chair with the confidence of someone accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, child. I heard about the spectacle in the throne room and thought you might benefit from perspective. Marianne straightened her spine. If you've come to offer pity, Your Grace, I don't want it. Good. Lady Beatrice smiled, sharp, knowing. Because I'm not offering any. Pity is for victims, and you, my dear, are not a victim. You are a princess who just survived an ambush with her dignity intact. That deserves congratulations, not consolation. Despite everything, Marianne felt a small spark of warmth. I'm not sure dignity counts when the entire court just watched me be humiliated. Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Lady Beatrice accepted tea from Agnes with a gracious nod. What the court saw was a foolish boy acting beneath his station, and a king putting him in his place. You, meanwhile, demonstrated spine. That child, is worth more than beauty in this world. Tell that to Prince Theodore. Theodore is irrelevant. The words were said with such casual dismissal that Marianne blinked. The boy has been coddled his entire life, raised by a doting mother who convinced him he was the center of the universe. He throws tantrums when reality disappoints him. Today, you were his tantrum. That's not exactly comforting. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be true. Lady Beatrice set down her cup. Here is what you need to understand about Valmont Court, Princess Marianne. Theodore is the crown prince, yes, but Dominic is the king. And everything in this palace revolves around what Dominic wants, what Dominic allows, what Dominic commands. Theodore can reject you from now until doomsday, but if Dominic decides this marriage will proceed, it will proceed. And if I'm reading the situation correctly, which I am, Dominic was not pleased with his son's behavior today. Marianne thought of the king's cold fury, the single word that had silenced Theodore mid-sentence. What are you saying? I'm saying don't count yourself out yet. The game isn't over. Lady Beatrice rose, smoothing her skirts. Now there's a dinner tonight. Small gathering, intimate by Valmont standards, only 50 or so guests. You will attend. You will hold your head high. And you will show this court that Princess Marianne of Rosewood is not a woman who crumbles under pressure. What if I do want to crumble? Then you crumble in private, like the rest of us. The older woman's expression softened fractionally. But not tonight, child. Tonight you fight. The garden party morning arrived with Agnes's gentle persistence and a gown that made Marianne's breath catch. Pale green silk embroidered with silver thread, cut to flatter her small frame without attempting to disguise it. Lady Beatrice sent it. Agnes explained as she fastened tiny pearl buttons. She said you should stop trying to be taller and start being yourself. Easy for her to say. She's not the one being paraded before the court like a circus attraction. No, Your Highness. She's the one who's survived 50 years of court politics and still commands respect wherever she goes. Agnes's tone was reproving. Perhaps you should listen to her. The garden party was held in Valmont's southern grounds. Acres of manicured lawns, ornamental hedges, and flower beds arranged with military precision. Pavilions offered shade, servants circulated with refreshments, and courtiers dressed in their finest strolled the pathways in carefully orchestrated displays of status and influence. Prince Theodore was late. Marianne stood near one of the pavilions, flanked by Agnes and Lady Beatrice, watching the other guests watch her. The whispers had evolved from yesterday's shock to today's speculation. Would the betrothal survive? Would Theodore appear? Was the alliance already doomed? He's making you wait deliberately, Lady Beatrice observed, accepting champagne from a passing footman. Petty power play. Ignore it. Everyone's staring. Let them. Smile. Nod. Act as if you haven't a care in the world. The dowager's sharp gaze scanned the crowd. Ah, there he is. Theodore emerged from the palace looking like something from a fashion plate. Cream silk waistcoat, perfectly tied cravat, boots polished to mirrors. Lady Celeste walked beside him, her hand on his arm, her laughter carrying across the garden. The message was clear. The crown prince was making a choice, and it wasn't the short princess from Rosewood. Breathe, Lady Beatrice murmured. Let him play his hand. You play yours. Theodore approached with Lady Celeste still attached to his arm. Up close, his eyes were bloodshot, his smile brittle. Princess Marianne. No apology, no explanation for his lateness. Shall we take a turn about the gardens? I believe it's expected. He didn't offer his other arm. Didn't dismiss Lady Celeste. Of course, Your Highness. Marianne kept her voice light, pleasant. Though perhaps Lady Celeste would prefer to join the other guests. I wouldn't want to monopolize your time. It was a gentle dismissal wrapped in courtesy. Theodore's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a voice cut through the tension. Theodore. King Dominic had appeared as if summoned, dressed in black as always, his presence immediately commanding attention from every corner of the garden. He looked at his son with an expression that could have frozen wine. Lady Celeste, how delightful to see you. I believe Lord Hertford was asking after you. He's by the Rose Arbor. The words were pleasant. The tone was not. Lady Celeste, no fool. curtsied hastily and fled. Theodore's face had gone rigid. "Father, I was merely showing poor judgment, again." Dominic's gaze shifted to Marianne, and something in his expression softened fractionally. "Princess Marianne, I hope my son hasn't kept you waiting long." "Not at all, Your Majesty. I was enjoying the gardens. They're quite fine this time of year." He extended his arm to her, not to Theodore, to her. "Walk with me. Theodore, you may accompany us." It was a power move so smooth that half the watching courtiers probably missed it. But Marianne understood. The king was publicly claiming her as his guest, his responsibility, his concern. And Theodore, demoted to follower rather than escort, had no choice but to comply. They walked 3 abreast down the garden paths, Marianne between father and son, hyper-aware of the dozens of eyes tracking their progress. Dominic set a measured pace that accommodated her shorter stride without making it obvious he was adjusting his steps. "The betrothal announcement will be published in the London papers next week," Dominic said, his tone conversational but carrying to nearby listeners. "I've invited several ambassadors to a formal dinner next month to celebrate. Princess Marianne, I trust you'll be comfortable managing the seating arrangements? It's traditionally the bride's responsibility." Marianne blinked. He was giving her authority, status, work that mattered. "Of course, Your Majesty. I would be honored." "Excellent. Theodore, you'll assist her with the diplomatic protocols. Some of these ambassadors can be particular about precedence. Father, I had planned to help your betrothed." "Yes, that's what I said." Dominic's tone allowed no argument. "It's time you took an interest in the practical aspects of your future role." They continued walking, the king pointing out various features of the gardens while maintaining a stream of conversation that was clearly intended for the courtiers straining to overhear. He asked Marianne's opinion on everything, which flowers she preferred, how Rosewood's gardens compared, whether she rode, what she thought of Valmont's architecture. He treated her, in short, like someone whose thoughts mattered. Theodore remained grimly silent throughout. When they reached a secluded section of the gardens, partially screened by high hedges, Dominic stopped. "Theodore, I believe Princess Marianne would appreciate a private word with you. I'll wait here." It was a command disguised as a suggestion. Theodore waited until his father was out of earshot, then turned to Marianne with barely concealed resentment. "Are you enjoying yourself? Making me look like a fool?" "I'm doing nothing," Marianne replied quietly. "Your father is trying to salvage a situation you created yesterday. Perhaps you should consider cooperating." "Cooperating? You mean pretending this farce is acceptable?" Theodore's voice rose slightly. "I don't want this marriage, Marianne. I don't want you. The sooner you accept that, the sooner what?" Marianne felt her own temper spark. "The sooner I release you from an obligation you never intended to honor." "Fine, let's return to the palace. I'll ask your father to dissolve the betrothal today." Theodore's expression flickered with something. Hope, perhaps, or relief. "You would do that? Why not? You've made your feelings abundantly clear. I have no desire to force myself on an unwilling husband." She started to walk past him, but his hand shot out, catching her wrist. "Wait. Why?" Because father won't let it go that easily." Theodore's grip loosened, but he didn't release her. "If you ask to dissolve the betrothal, he'll refuse. He'll say you're acting under duress, or that I've failed in my duty. He'll make this my fault, and I'll spend the rest of my life being reminded of it. Then what do you want?" "Time." Theodore's mask of aristocratic disdain had cracked, revealing something younger and more desperate beneath. "Give me time to convince father this won't work. Let the betrothal die naturally rather than forcing a confrontation. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we play our parts. Appear together at functions. Maintain appearances. But we don't," he gestured helplessly, "we don't pretend this is more than it is." Marianne studied him, really looked at him for the first time. And what she saw was a man caught between duty and desire, bullied by his father's expectations and desperate to find some autonomy in a life that had never truly belonged to him. She understood that feeling better than he could imagine. "Fine," she said quietly. "We maintain appearances. But Theodore, no more public humiliations. No more Lady Celeste on your arm when you're supposed to be with me. And no more making me wait while you prove some point. If we're going to pretend, we pretend properly." "Agreed," Relief flooded his features. Agreed. Good. Marianne pulled her wrist free and returned to where King Dominic waited, Theodore trailing behind her. The king's gaze moved between them with sharp assessment. All settled? Yes, your majesty, Marianne replied. Prince Theodore and I have come to an understanding. Excellent. Dominic offered his arm again, and Marianne took it, letting him guide her back toward the main gathering. Tell me, princess, do you play chess? The question surprised her. A little. My father taught me. Good. I find chess an excellent metaphor for court politics. Perhaps you'd indulge me in a game sometime. I so rarely find worthy opponents. Behind them, Theodore made a small, strangled sound. Marianne fought back an unexpected smile. I would be honored, your majesty, though I should warn you, I'm not very good. Somehow, Dominic said, a hint of warmth finally touching his severe features. I doubt that. The chess match continued. 3 days passed in a strange new rhythm. Theodore maintained his distance, but fulfilled his public obligations with marginally better grace. They appeared together at a musical, a tea with visiting dignitaries, and a riding party through Valmont's grounds. All carefully orchestrated displays of unity that convinced exactly no one but satisfied protocol. Through it all, Marianne felt King Dominic's attention like weight and warmth combined. He appeared at functions where his presence wasn't strictly required. He asked her opinions during council meetings she'd been invited to observe. He corrected courtiers who addressed her with insufficient respect. It was confusing, unsettling, and entirely improper for a king to pay such attention to his son's betrothed. Lady Beatrice noticed. Of course. The king is taking an interest, she observed one afternoon as they took tea in Marianne's chambers. He's being courteous to a guest. My dear child, I have known Dominic for 30 years. He is many things, commanding, brilliant, occasionally ruthless, but he is never merely courteous. When he gives attention, it's deliberate. The dowager set down her cup with a thoughtful expression. He's evaluating you. For what purpose? That remains to be seen. The summons came that evening, a formal note requesting Princess Marianne's presence in the king's private study at 8 o'clock. For chess. Agnes fretted over what Marianne should wear, finally settling on a gown of deep wine-colored silk that was elegant without being ostentatious. As Marianne made her way through the evening quiet corridors, her heart hammered with an anxiety she couldn't quite name. The king's study was smaller than she'd expected, still grand, but designed for function rather than display. Bookshelves lined 2 walls. A massive desk dominated one corner and near the fire. A chess table waited with pieces already arranged. King Dominic stood by the window, still dressed in formal black, but with his jacket removed and cravat loosened, the most informal she'd seen him. When he turned at her entrance, something in his severe features softened fractionally. Princess Marianne, thank you for indulging me. He gestured to the chess table. Please sit. White or black? Black, if you don't mind, your majesty. I prefer responding to my opponent's strategy rather than setting it. Interesting choice. He settled into the chair across from her, and Marianne was struck by how different he seemed here, still commanding, but without the rigid formality he wore in public like armor. Most players prefer the advantage of the first move. Most players are more confident than I am, or less strategic. He moved his king's pawn forward 2 squares, a classical opening. Tell me about Rosewood, princess. What was your life like before this betrothal? The question surprised her even as she considered her response, moving her own pawn to mirror his. Quiet, ordinary. I managed my father's household after my mother died, received visiting dignitaries, tried to stretch limited resources as far as possible. You took on administrative duties at 20? He moved his knight. That's young for such responsibility. There was no one else. My father was struggling. With grief, with the kingdom's finances, with everything. She moved her bishop, starting to see the pattern of his attack. I did what was necessary. As you're doing now. As I'm always doing. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. Forgive me, your majesty. That was inappropriate. It was honest. His gaze lifted from the board to her face. I invited you here for honesty, Princess. The court offers nothing but performance and pretense. I'm weary of it. They played in silence for several moves, the only sounds the soft click of pieces on wood and the crackle of the fire. Dominic's strategy became clear. He was testing her defenses, probing for weaknesses without committing to a full assault. Why did you agree to this betrothal? He asked suddenly. The truth, not the diplomatic answer. Marianne studied the board, then moved her queen into a defensive position. Because my father needed me to. Because Rosewood would have fallen without Valmont's support. Because I am a princess, and princesses do their duty. Even when that duty means marrying a man who treats you with contempt. Even then, that's not duty, Princess. That's martyrdom. He captured one of her pawns with ruthless efficiency. There's a difference, is there? Marianne met his gaze directly. You married for duty, didn't you? Queen Catherine. The portraits show a beautiful woman. Did you love her? The question was far too personal, far too bold. But something in the intimate quiet of the study made boldness feel possible. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gray eyes. I respected her, honored her, provided for her every comfort. But love? He moved his rook into an attacking position. No, we married because our kingdoms needed the alliance. She understood that. We were cordial partners. That sounds lonely. It was practical. He paused, studying the board with an intensity that suggested he was seeing more than chess pieces. Catherine died 5 years ago. A riding accident, her horse spooked through her. She broke her neck. It was quick, at least. Painless. I'm sorry for your loss, Your Majesty. Are you? Most people offer condolences without meaning them. It's expected performance, nothing more. His gaze lifted to her again. But you mean it, don't you? You actually care. Of course I care. No one should die alone and unmourned. She wasn't unmourned. The entire kingdom went into formal mourning for a year. But mourning and grief are different things, Princess. One is performance. The other is... He trailed off, returning his attention to the board. Check. Marianne hadn't even seen the threat developing. His bishop had created a diagonal attack on her king that she'd completely missed while focused on his rook. She moved her king to safety, but the damage was done. He'd disrupted her defense, and now she was playing catch-up. You're better at this than you claimed, Dominic observed. You're better at distraction than I anticipated. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth, so brief she almost missed it. But there. Fair point. Tell me, Princess, if you could have any life you wanted, duty and obligation removed, what would you choose? The question hung in the air between them. Marianne moved her knight, buying time to think. I would have a library, she said finally. A large one with windows facing south for good light. I would read every morning and manage an estate in the afternoons. Something productive, where I could see the results of good governance. I would have a garden of my own design, and I would be useful, not decorative, not symbolic. Actually useful to people who needed help. No husband in this fantasy? I hadn't thought that far. Because you've given up on the idea of marriage as anything but transaction? He moved his queen into position, and Marianne saw the checkmate coming 3 moves away. That's bleak, Princess. That's realistic. She made her final move, delaying the inevitable by 1 turn. We can't all afford romanticism, Your Majesty. No, but we can afford honesty. He placed his queen for the final move. Checkmate. Marianne studied the board, seeing how thoroughly he'd outmaneuvered her. You're much better at this than I am. I've had 53 years of practice. You held your own remarkably well for someone who claims not to be good. He began resetting the pieces. Again, they played 3 more games. She lost them all but improved each time, learning his patterns, anticipating his strategies, and between moves they talked about governance, about the weight of duty, about the gap between who people were and who they were expected to be. It was only when the clock struck 11 that Marianne realized how much time had passed. I should return to my chambers, she said reluctantly. It's late, and propriety demands you not spend hours alone with your betrothed's father. Dominic's tone was dry. Yes, I'm aware. though I'll note that propriety seems less concerned about the fact that my son flaunts his mistress in public while ignoring his intended bride." The bitterness in his voice surprised her. "You're angry with him. I'm disappointed. There's a difference." He stood, offering his hand to help her rise. Unnecessary, but courteous. "Theodore has gifts he refuses to develop. Intelligence he won't apply. He could be a remarkable leader if he chose to be. Instead, he plays at being a prince while avoiding actual responsibility. He's young. He's 27. I was leading armies at that age." Dominic walked her to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Princess Marianne, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Of course, Your Majesty. Are you happy? With this arrangement, with Theodore, with any of this?" The question was so unexpected, so genuine, that Marianne felt her careful composure crack. "Does it matter if I'm happy? It matters to me." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Marianne didn't dare examine. Before she could respond, Dominic opened the door, and the spell of intimacy broke. "Thank you for the games, Princess. I enjoyed our conversation." His formal mask had returned, but something in his eyes remained unguarded. "We should do this again. If you're willing, I would like that." "Your Majesty..." She walked back to her chambers in a daze, Agnes trailing behind her, and tried not to think about why an evening playing chess with her betrothed's father felt more like courtship than any moment she'd spent with Theodore. 3 days passed in a strange new rhythm. Theodore maintained his distance but fulfilled his public obligations with marginally better grace. They appeared together at a musicale, a tea with visiting dignitaries, and a riding party through Valmont's grounds, all carefully orchestrated displays of unity that convinced exactly no one but satisfied protocol. Through it all, Marianne felt King Dominic's attention like weight and warmth combined. He appeared at functions where his presence wasn't strictly required. He asked her opinions during council meetings she'd been invited to observe. He corrected courtiers who addressed her with insufficient respect. It was confusing, unsettling, and entirely improper for a king to pay such attention to his son's betrothed. Lady Beatrice noticed. "Of course. The king is taking an interest," she observed one afternoon as they took tea in Marianne's chambers. "He's being courteous to a guest." "My dear child, I have known Dominic for 30 years. He is many things, commanding, brilliant, occasionally ruthless, but he is never merely courteous. When he gives attention, it's deliberate." The dowager set down her cup with a thoughtful expression. "He's evaluating you. For what purpose? That remains to be seen." The summons came that evening, a formal note requesting Princess Marianne's presence in the king's private study at 8 o'clock. For chess. Agnes fretted over what Marianne should wear, finally settling on a gown of deep wine-colored silk that was elegant without being ostentatious. As Marianne made her way through the evening quiet corridors, her heart hammered with an anxiety she couldn't quite name. The king's study was smaller than she'd expected, still grand, but designed for function rather than display. Bookshelves lined 2 walls. A massive desk dominated one corner and near the fire. A chess table waited with pieces already arranged. King Dominic stood by the window, still dressed in formal black but with his jacket removed and cravat loosened, the most informal she'd seen him. When he turned at her entrance, something in his severe features softened, fractionally. "Princess Marianne, thank you for indulging me." He gestured to the chess table. "Please sit. White or black?" "Black, if you don't mind, Your Majesty. I prefer responding to my opponent's strategy rather than setting it." "Interesting choice." He settled into the chair across from her, and Marianne was struck by how different he seemed here. Still commanding, but without the rigid formality he wore in public like armor. Most players prefer the advantage of the first move. Most players are more confident than I am, or less strategic. He moved his king's pawn forward 2 squares, a classical opening. "Tell me about Rosewood, Princess. What was your life like before this betrothal?" The question surprised her even as she considered her response, moving her own pawn to mirror his. "Quiet, ordinary. I managed my father's household after my mother died, received visiting dignitaries, tried to stretch limited resources as far as possible. You took on administrative duties at 20? He moved his knight. That's young for such responsibility. There was no one else. My father was struggling. With grief, with the kingdom's finances, with everything. She moved her bishop, starting to see the pattern of his attack. I did what was necessary. As you're doing now, as I'm always doing. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. Forgive me, Your Majesty. That was inappropriate. It was honest. His gaze lifted from the board to her face. I invited you here for honesty, Princess. The court offers nothing but performance and pretense. I'm weary of it. They played in silence for several moves. The only sounds the soft click of pieces on wood and the crackle of the fire. Dominic's strategy became clear. He was testing her defenses, probing for weaknesses without committing to a full assault. Why did you agree to this betrothal? He asked suddenly. The truth, not the diplomatic answer. Marianne studied the board, then moved her queen into a defensive position. Because my father needed me to. Because Rosewood would have fallen without Valmont's support. Because I am a princess, and princesses do their duty. Even when that duty means marrying a man who treats you with contempt? Even then, that's not duty, Princess. That's martyrdom. He captured one of her pawns with ruthless efficiency. There's a difference, is there? Marianne met his gaze directly. You married for duty, didn't you? Queen Catherine. The portraits show a beautiful woman. Did you love her? The question was far too personal, far too bold, but something in the intimate quiet of the study made boldness feel possible. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gray eyes. I respected her, honored her, provided for her every comfort. But love? He moved his rook into an attacking position. No, we married because our kingdoms needed the alliance. She understood that. We were cordial partners. That sounds lonely. It was practical. He paused, studying the board with an intensity that suggested he was seeing more than chess pieces. Catherine died 5 years ago. A riding accident. Her horse spooked through her. She broke her neck. It was quick, at least. Painless. I'm sorry for your loss, Your Majesty. Are you? Most people offer condolences without meaning them. It's expected performance, nothing more. His gaze lifted to her again. But you mean it, don't you? You actually care. Of course I care. No one should die alone and unmourned. She wasn't unmourned. The entire kingdom went into formal mourning for a year. But mourning and grief are different things, Princess. One is performance. The other is... He trailed off, returning his attention to the board. Check. Marianne hadn't even seen the threat developing. His bishop had created a diagonal attack on her king that she'd completely missed while focused on his rook. She moved her king to safety, but the damage was done. He'd disrupted her defense, and now she was playing catch-up. You're better at this than you claimed, Dominic observed. You're better at distraction than I anticipated. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. So brief she almost missed it. But there. Fair point. Tell me, Princess, if you could have any life you wanted, duty and obligation removed, what would you choose? The question hung in the air between them. Marianne moved her knight, buying time to think. I would have a library, she said finally. A large one, with windows facing south for good light. I would read every morning and manage an estate in the afternoons. Something productive, where I could see the results of good governance. I would have a garden of my own design, and I would be useful. Not decorative, not symbolic. Actually useful to people who needed help. No husband in this fantasy? I hadn't thought that far. Because you've given up on the idea of marriage as anything but transaction? He moved his queen into position, and Marianne saw the checkmate coming 3 moves away. That's bleak, Princess. That's realistic. She made her final move, delaying the inevitable by 1 turn. We can't all afford romanticism, Your Majesty. No, but we can afford honesty. He placed his queen for the final move. Checkmate. Marianne studied the board, seeing how thoroughly he'd outmaneuvered her. You're much better at this than I am. I've had 53 years of practice. You held your own remarkably well for someone who claims not to be good. He began resetting the pieces. Again? They played 3 more games. She lost them all but improved each time, learning his patterns, anticipating his strategies. And between moves, they talked about governance. about the weight of duty, about the gap between who people were and who they were expected to be. It was only when the clock struck 11 that Marianne realized how much time had passed. "I should return to my chambers," she said reluctantly. "It's late, and propriety demands you not spend hours alone with your betrothed's father." Dominic's tone was dry. "Yes, I'm aware. Though I'll note that propriety seems less concerned about the fact that my son flaunts his mistress in public while ignoring his intended bride." The bitterness in his voice surprised her. "You're angry with him. I'm disappointed. There's a difference." He stood, offering his hand to help her rise, unnecessary, but courteous. "Theodore has gifts he refuses to develop, intelligence he won't apply. He could be a remarkable leader if he chose to be. Instead, he plays at being a prince while avoiding actual responsibility. He's young. He's 27. I was leading armies at that age." Dominic walked her to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Princess Marianne, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Of course, Your Majesty. Are you happy? With this arrangement? With Theodore? With any of this?" The question was so unexpected, so genuine, that Marianne felt her careful composure crack. "Does it matter if I'm happy?" "It matters to me." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Marianne didn't dare examine. Before she could respond, Dominic opened the door, and the spell of intimacy broke. "Thank you for the games, Princess. I enjoyed our conversation." His formal mask had returned, but something in his eyes remained unguarded. "We should do this again. If you're willing, I would like that." "Your Majesty." She walked back to her chambers in a daze, Agnes trailing behind her, and tried not to think about why an evening playing chess with her betrothed's father felt more like courtship than any moment she'd spent with Theodore. The opera. The Royal Opera House of Valmont was a jewel box of gilt and crimson velvet, designed to showcase not just the performance on stage, but the aristocracy in its boxes. Tonight's performance, La Traviata, promised scandal and tragedy, which meant every seat would be filled, and every opera glass trained on the royal box, where Marianne would sit beside Theodore for 3 hours, performing Unity for an audience more interested in their drama than Verdi's. The pearls. "I think," Agnes said, fastening a strand around Marianne's neck. Simple but elegant. The gown was new. Theodore's mother, Queen Isolde, had sent it with a note stating that Crown Princess-to-be must be appropriately dressed for important public appearances. It was beautiful, if overwhelming. White silk with gold embroidery, cut low at the shoulders in a way that made Marianne feel exposed. "I look like a wedding cake." "You look regal," Agnes corrected firmly. "Now stop fidgeting. You're a princess, not a debutante." Theodore arrived precisely on time, looking bored already. He offered his arm with mechanical courtesy, and they processed down to the waiting carriage without speaking. Lady Beatrice had arranged to accompany them, a buffer against awkwardness and a witness to propriety. The opera house blazed with light. The crowd parted as they entered, whispers rising like tide. Marianne kept her chin high, her hand light on Theodore's arm, her expression pleasant and empty. The royal box occupied the best position in the house, central, elevated, impossible to ignore. King Dominic was already seated, speaking with several ambassadors who occupied the adjoining boxes. When Marianne entered, his gaze found her immediately. Something in his expression shifted, a subtle tightening around his eyes, a fractional pause. His attention traveled over her appearance with an intensity that made her skin warm before he caught himself and returned to his conversation. Princess Marianne, Queen Isolde materialized from the crowd, resplendent in purple silk and diamonds that could ransom kingdoms. "How lovely you look. Though perhaps the gown is a bit mature for your stature. I'll send word to the modisti to adjust future selections." The criticism was delivered with a smile. Theodore's mother had perfected the art of the cutting compliment, words that sounded kind but drew blood. "You're very thoughtful, Your Majesty," Marianne replied, matching her tone. "Though I confess I find the gown quite comfortable. Your taste is impeccable." Isolde's eyes narrowed fractionally. She'd caught the deflection, but before she could respond, King Dominic intervened. "The gown is perfect," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the surrounding boxes. Princess Marianne does it credit. Shall we take our seats? The performance begins shortly. The seating arrangement had clearly been planned by Isolde. Theodore and Marianne in the front of the box, highly visible. The queen beside her son, King Dominic in the back corner, separate from the engaged couple. But as they settled, Dominic leaned forward, his voice low, and meant only for Marianne. Ignore my former queen's commentary. She has particular opinions about everything and everyone. Former queen? Marianne whispered back. Catherine held that title. Isolde is Queen Dowager now, though she seems to forget. There was an edge to his words. She has strong views about Theodore's marriage prospects. The lights dimmed. The orchestra swelled into the overture. And for the next 3 hours, Marianne existed in a strange duality, aware of Theodore's disinterest beside her, aware of the opera glasses trained on their box, aware of the tragic love story unfolding on stage, and hyper-aware of King Dominic's presence behind her, his attention a weight she could feel even without looking. At the first intermission, courtiers descended like locusts. Theodore immediately engaged with a group of young nobles, leaving Marianne standing alone until Lady Beatrice materialized at her elbow. Well handled, child. You've survived Act 1. 2 more acts to endure. Think of it as practice. Court life is mostly endurance punctuated by brief moments of actual interest. The Dowager's gaze tracked something across the room. Ah, Lord Ashford is approaching. Fair warning, he's an insufferable bore who will try to engage you in conversation about agriculture. I like agriculture. Then, you deserve each other. Lord Ashford proved to be exactly as advertised. Elderly, enthusiastic about crop rotation, and completely oblivious to social cues. Marianne listened with genuine interest as he explained new irrigation techniques his estate was implementing, asking questions that made his weathered face light up with pleasure. Remarkable, he said finally. Most young ladies pretend interest in estate management while clearly longing to escape, but you actually understand the principles. I managed my father's estate for several years, my lord. Good governance fascinates me. Then you must visit Ashford Hall sometime. I've implemented several innovations that... Lord Ashford. King Dominic's voice cut through the conversation with the precision of a knife. How delightful to see you boring someone who actually listens. But I'm afraid I must steal Princess Marianne. We have diplomatic matters to discuss. It wasn't remotely true, and everyone knew it. But it was the king, and Lord Ashford could do nothing but bow and retreat. Dominic offered his arm. Walk with me. The upper gallery is less crowded. They climbed the curved staircase to a quieter level, where fewer courtiers congregated, and the noise of the crowd below became distant murmur. Tall windows overlook the city, moonlight competing with street lamps. You rescued me, Marianne said. I liberated you. There's a difference. He stopped by one of the windows, releasing her arm. Though you seem to genuinely enjoy Ashford's agricultural discourse. I did. Crop rotation is underrated. Dominic laughed. An actual laugh, brief but genuine. You continue to surprise me, princess. Because I find farming interesting? Because you are exactly what you present yourself to be. No artifice, no performance, just... He gestured, searching for words. Authenticity. It's rare in this world of masks and manners. Perhaps I'm simply not clever enough to maintain a convincing mask. Or perhaps you're clever enough not to need one. His expression grew serious. How are you managing? Truly, not the diplomatic answer. Marianne considered lying, maintaining the fiction that everything was fine, but something about being alone with him in this quiet space made dishonesty feel impossible. I'm lonely, she admitted. Theodore barely speaks to me except when required. Your former queen critiques everything I do. The courtiers watch me like I'm entertainment. And She stopped, surprised by her own honesty. And you what? And I wonder if I made the wrong choice. If I should have accepted your offer to dissolve the betrothal while I had the chance. Dominic's jaw tightened. The offer still stands. Does it? Or would breaking the betrothal now cause the very scandal you were trying to avoid? I don't care about scandal. I care about... He stopped abruptly, his hand flexing against the window frame. I care that you're being treated poorly in my house, under my protection. I'm not your responsibility, Your Majesty. I'm Theodore's intended bride. Yes, and that's the problem. The words came out rough, almost harsh. Then he seemed to catch himself, schooling his features back to neutrality. The intermission is nearly over. We should return. But he didn't move, and neither did Marianne. They stood in the moonlit gallery, the space between them charged with something neither could acknowledge. Your Majesty, Dominic. The word was quiet but firm. When we're alone, you'll call me Dominic. That's not appropriate. Nothing about this is appropriate. His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. But I find I've stopped caring about propriety where you're concerned. The confession hung between them, dangerous and electric. Marianne knew she should retreat, should laugh it off, should maintain the proper distance between a king and his son's betrothed. Instead, she whispered, Dominic, his hand lifted, hovering near her face as if he might touch her cheek, trace the line of her jaw. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just them, just this moment, just the possibility of... Father! Theodore's voice from the stairwell shattered the moment. Dominic's hand dropped, his expression shuddering closed. The prince appeared at the top of the stairs, flushed and irritated. Mother is asking where you've gone. The second act is beginning. Of course. Dominic's voice had returned to its usual controlled tenor. We were simply discussing diplomatic protocols. Princess Marianne had questions about the ambassadorial dinner she's organizing. Theodore looked between them with suspicion, but said nothing. He offered his arm to Marianne with poor grace, and they returned to the box in silence. For the rest of the opera, Marianne couldn't focus on the stage. She felt Dominic's presence behind her like heat, felt the weight of everything unspoken, and tried not to think about how his almost touch had made her feel more seen, more valued, more wanted than anything Theodore had ever said. When the final curtain fell and they rose to leave, Queen Isolde's sharp gaze moved between her son and Marianne with calculating assessment. Such a lovely evening, she said sweetly. Though I noticed you disappeared during intermission, Princess. One must be careful about appearances. Princess Marianne was with me, Dominic said flatly, discussing estate management and diplomacy. Nothing remotely scandalous unless you count agricultural policy as shocking. Several nearby courtiers laughed. Isolde's mouth tightened, but she said nothing more. The crisis, the illness came to Valmont like a thief in the night, sudden, vicious, and indiscriminate. A fever that struck the Eastern District's poorest quarters, spreading through crowded tenements with terrifying speed. Within 3 days, 50 people had fallen ill. Within a week, the death count had risen to 12. The court responded with predictable self-preservation, canceling public events, increasing guard presence around the palace, and quietly suggesting that perhaps the crown prince and his betrothed should retreat to the country estate until the crisis passed. Theodore agreed immediately. There's no point in risking ourselves needlessly. We'll depart tomorrow. They were in the morning room, Marianne, Theodore, Queen Isolde, and several advisors discussing the situation. Outside the windows, Valmont's streets had grown quieter, fear keeping people indoors. What about the sick? Marianne asked. Theodore blinked at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. What about them? Who's organizing medical care? Food distribution? The Eastern District's residents can't work if they're ill or caring for sick family members. They'll need support. That's what the district physicians are for. And if there aren't enough physicians, if supplies run short? Marianne looked around the table, seeing carefully neutral expressions that revealed more than words. Who's coordinating the relief effort? That would typically fall to the Queen's household, one of the advisors said carefully. But given the risks, all eyes turned to Queen Isolde, who raised one elegant eyebrow. I am not qualified to organize medical relief. Such matters are best left to professionals. Then let me do it, Marianne heard herself say. Silence. Absolutely not, Theodore said flatly. You could contract the fever. So could anyone. But someone needs to coordinate the response, and I have experience managing crisis situations. In Rosewood, Isolde said with barely concealed disdain, a minor kingdom with minor problems. This is Valmont. The scale is entirely different. The principles are the same. People are sick. They need food, medicine, clean water, and organization. Marianne felt her spine straighten, her voice strengthen. I can help. Let me help. Absolutely not, Theodore repeated. Father would never approve. Approve what? King Dominic stood in the doorway, still dressed in riding clothes, dust on his boots. He'd been inspecting the affected district personally, a fact that had scandalized his advisors and impressed everyone else. Princess Marianne wants to involve herself in the relief efforts, Theodore said. I've explained that's inappropriate and dangerous. Dominic's gaze fixed on Marianne with that same intense focus she was beginning to recognize. Has she? Tell me, Princess, what exactly are you proposing? Marianne stood facing him directly. The Eastern District needs coordinated support. Medical supplies, food distribution, temporary housing for families in quarantine. Someone needs to organize the effort, manage resources, and ensure nothing falls through bureaucratic gaps. I can do that. You would put yourself at risk. Less risk than you took riding through infected neighborhoods this morning, Your Majesty. A flicker of something. Approval? Amusement? Crossed his features. Fair point. But as Theodore noted, you're not queen yet. You have no official authority to command palace resources. Then give me the authority. The boldness of her own words shocked her. Around the table, advisors exchanged glances. Isolde's expression had gone rigid with disapproval. Theodore looked horrified. Dominic studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Done. As of now, Princess Marianne has full authority to coordinate relief efforts for the Eastern District. She'll have access to the palace treasury, palace physicians, and any resources she deems necessary. All departments will report to her regarding this matter. Father, you can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Dominic's tone allowed no argument. The Eastern District is suffering. Princess Marianne has offered to help. I'm accepting that offer. Do you have an objection, Theodore? Perhaps you'd prefer to organize the relief yourself. Theodore's mouth opened and closed. No. But surely Mother has made clear she's not interested. Dominic's gaze swept the room. Anyone else wish to volunteer? No? Then Princess Marianne has my full support. The first meeting will convene in 1 hour in the council chamber. Princess, you'll chair it. I'll attend to provide whatever backing you need. He strode from the room, leaving chaos in his wake. Isolde leaned forward, her voice dripping ice. This is highly irregular. You're overstepping, Princess. Badly. Perhaps, Marianne replied, feeling a strange calm settle over her. But people are dying, Your Majesty. I'd rather overstep and help than maintain propriety while doing nothing. An hour later, Marianne stood at the head of a council table surrounded by palace physicians, district administrators, and logistics officers, all looking at her with varying degrees of skepticism. She was a short princess from a bankrupt kingdom, barely 22, with no formal authority beyond the king's abrupt declaration. She was also the only person in the room who seemed willing to make decisions. Gentlemen, she began, her voice clear and firm, thank you for coming on short notice. We have a crisis that requires immediate action. I need current numbers. How many ill? How many dead? How many physicians in the district? Current supply levels of medicine and food. Let's start there. The district physician cleared his throat. Your Highness, with respect, the situation is quite complex. Perhaps we should wait for more senior... Dr. Matthews. King Dominic's voice cut through the room from where he stood by the window, arms crossed. He hadn't sat, hadn't joined the table, but his presence dominated nonetheless. Princess Marianne asked you a question. Answer it. The physician paled slightly. Yes, Your Majesty. Current count is 87 ill, 19 dead. We have 4 physicians serving the district, all overwhelmed. Medical supplies are running critically low. We need more fever reducers, clean bandages, herbs for brewing medicinal tea. Marianne listened, taking mental notes. What about food distribution? The sick can't work. Families are running out of food. Then we establish distribution points. Every family with a sick member gets daily food rations delivered to their door. No one should have to choose between nursing their loved ones and earning wages. She turned to the logistics officer. Can the palace kitchens handle that? Yes, Your Highness, but the cost is irrelevant. Draw on the treasury. Next, housing. Families in close quarters spread infection. We need temporary quarantine housing for the sick. The old barracks near the eastern gate, one administrator suggested. They're empty but structurally sound. Perfect. Clean them. Staff them with physicians. Move the sickest patients there. Families can visit, but with protective measures. Marianne's mind raced, pulling together everything she'd learned managing Rosewood during harder times. We also need a central coordination point. Someone the district residents can approach with problems or needs. I'll establish office hours daily. Absolutely not, Theodore interjected. He'd entered quietly and now stood near his father. You are not setting foot in that district. I'll take precautions. No. Theodore's face had gone red. This is madness. Father, tell her. Tell her what? Dominic's gaze never left Marianne, but his tone was steel. That she should abandon suffering people? That her safety matters more than the lives of our subjects? Is that what you want me to say, Theodore? I want you to show some sense. She's my betrothed. If something happens to her, then you would be inconvenienced? Marianne's voice cut across his. Is that your concern, Theodore? That my death would disrupt your plans? The room went deathly silent. Theodore's expression flickered with something that might have been shame. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He had no answer. Marianne turned back to the assembled officials. I'll maintain proper precautions. But I won't coordinate relief from the safety of the palace while people suffer. We'll establish the office in the district administrative building. Open space, good ventilation, separate from patient care areas. Are we agreed? Around the table, heads nodded. Excellent. Dr. Matthews, prepare a list of needed medical supplies. I'll arrange immediate procurement. Lord Ashford. She addressed the agricultural enthusiast from the opera, who had somehow ended up at this meeting. I need advice on food supplies that can be prepared in bulk and transport well. Will you assist? The old lord's face lit up. It would be my honor, Your Highness. For the next 2 hours, they worked through logistics, supply chains, staffing needs, and communication protocols. Marianne found herself falling into a familiar rhythm, the same skills she'd used keeping Rosewood functioning during its darkest days, now applied at larger scale. King Dominic remained throughout, occasionally interjecting questions or providing authorization for expenditures, but largely letting Marianne lead. When she glanced his way during a brief pause, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Pride mixed with something deeper, something that had no place between a king and his son's betrothed. When the meeting finally concluded and officials dispersed to their tasks, Marianne sagged slightly against the table, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. Well done. Dominic's voice came from directly behind her. When had he moved so close? You commanded that room like you were born to it. Princess Marianne. Isolde's voice could have frozen wine. I think it's time we spoke frankly. Of course, Your Majesty. You have been in Valmont for nearly 2 months. In that time, you have managed to make yourself indispensable. The relief effort has been remarkably successful. The Eastern District's fever is nearly contained. The people speak your name with gratitude. Isolde's smile didn't reach her eyes. Quite an accomplishment for someone who arrived as little more than a diplomatic consolation prize. Marianne kept her expression neutral. I simply did what needed to be done. Yes, you did. And in doing so, you've positioned yourself very cleverly. The Queen rose, circling Marianne like a predator assessing prey. Tell me, Princess, what exactly are your intentions toward the king? The accusation hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. I have no intentions toward His Majesty beyond appropriate respect. Don't insult my intelligence. Isolde's voice cracked like a whip. I have eyes. I have ears. Every servant in this palace reports what they see. The late-night chess games, the private conversations, the way he looks at you, the way you look at him. Your Majesty, I assure you, you assure me of nothing. You are betrothed to my son, yet you spend more time with his father than with him. You seek Dominic's counsel, his approval, his presence. And he... Her voice roughened with something that might have been pain. He gives it freely. More freely than he ever gave anything to Catherine. More freely than he's given to anyone in 5 years. Marianne's throat tightened. If I've been improper, I apologize. It was never my intention. Your intentions are irrelevant. The result is the same. You've bewitched him. Isolde moved to the window, her back rigid. Do you know what Catherine was? Beautiful, accomplished, perfect in every way. And still, Dominic gave her nothing but courtesy and respect. He honored her, provided for her, but he never loved her. In 28 years of marriage, he never once looked at her the way he looks at you after 2 months. The words landed like blows. Marianne felt something twist in her chest. Guilt, yes, but also a horrible, traitorous warmth at the confirmation that Dominic's attention wasn't imagined. I don't know what to say. Say you'll end it. Say you'll maintain proper distance. Say you'll marry Theodore and leave Dominic alone. Isolde turned, and her expression was no longer cold. It was desperate. He's a good man, Princess. The best man I've ever known. He deserves peace, not another complication. And you could ruin him. Scandal involving the king and his son's betrothed? It would destroy everything Dominic has built. I would never. You already are. The Queen's voice gentled fractionally. I don't think you mean harm, but good intentions don't prevent damage. End this, Princess, for both your sakes. The door opened before Marianne could respond. A servant entered, bowing low. Your Majesty, His Majesty the King requests Princess Marianne's presence in his study immediately. Isolde's jaw tightened. Tell the King Princess Marianne is indisposed. Your Majesty. His Majesty said it was urgent. Regarding the relief effort. Of course he did. Isolde waved a dismissive hand. Go then, but remember what I've said. Marianne fled the salon with something close to relief, but Isolde's words followed her through the corridors like accusations. You've bewitched him. He never looked at Catherine the way he looks at you. You could ruin him. She found Dominic in his study, not at his desk, but standing by the fire, staring into flames with an expression that made her steps falter. Your Majesty, you sent for me? He turned, and she saw immediately that something was wrong. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. Close the door. She did, her heart hammering. There's no relief business, he said flatly. I lied to get you here. I needed to speak with you privately, and I'm past caring about propriety. Your Majesty, Theodore came to me 3 days ago. Dominic cut her off, his words clipped and controlled. He wants to dissolve the betrothal. The world tilted. What? He's in love with Lady Celeste. Has been for years. He wants permission to break the engagement, marry her, and make her crown princess. Dominic's laugh was bitter. He stood in the study and told me you would understand. That you've been so focused on relief work, you clearly aren't interested in him anyway. That ending the betrothal would be a kindness to both of you. Marianne sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unreliable. And what did you say? I said no. The word was harsh. I said the contracts are signed. Rosewood depends on this alliance, and he will honor his commitments. I said he's behaving like a spoiled child who wants what he can't have while discarding what he's been given. I said... He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration, so uncharacteristic it was shocking. I said a great many things that made him hate me even more than he already does. Why? The question hung between them. Dominic's gaze found hers across the study, and the intensity in his gray eyes made breathing difficult, because the alternative was admitting that he's right, that this betrothal is wrong, that you deserve better than a husband who doesn't want you and a king who... He stopped himself. A king who what? Who wants you himself. The confession came out rough, raw, stripped of every careful defense. God help me, Marianne. I want you. I have wanted you since the moment you stood in my throne room and defended yourself with more courage than half my courtiers possess. I want you when I see you in meetings, commanding rooms full of men who should dismiss you but can't because you're too brilliant, too competent, too real. I want you when we play chess, and you surprise me with strategies I didn't anticipate. I want you every moment you're near and every moment you're not. Marianne couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at him as he shattered every pretense between them. This is madness. Dominic's voice had gone hoarse. You're betrothed to my son. You're young enough to be my daughter. You're a princess of Rosewood, and I'm a king who should know better than to feel anything beyond appropriate interest in his son's intended bride. Every reason I can name says this is wrong. And yet, Marianne's voice came out barely above a whisper. And yet I can't stop. Can't pretend indifference. Can't watch Theodore treat you with contempt while I... He moved closer, each step deliberate. Tell me to stop, Marianne. Tell me this is one-sided, that you feel nothing, that I'm a fool imagining reciprocation where none exists. Tell me, and I'll bury this. I'll maintain distance. I'll marry you to Theodore and never speak of it again. But if you can't say that, if there's any chance you feel even a fraction of what I feel. He stood before her now, close enough that she could see the pulse at his throat, the tension in his jaw, the war being waged behind his careful control. Marianne rose on shaking legs. Every rational thought screamed that she should deny it, should protect them both from this impossible situation. But Isolde's words echoed in her mind. Good intentions don't prevent damage. The damage was already done. I can't say it, she whispered. I can't say I feel nothing, because it would be a lie. Dominic's breath left him in a rush. His hand lifted, cupping her face with such gentleness it made her throat ache. This is impossible. I know. There's no good ending here. Theodore will never willingly release you. Rosewood needs the alliance. Any scandal would damage both kingdoms. We're trapped in a situation neither of us chose, and both of us hate. I know. Marianne's hand covered his where it rested against her cheek, but knowing doesn't change what's true. For a long moment, they stood there, a king and a princess, separated by duty and circumstance, connected by something neither could name but both recognized. Then Dominic stepped back, breaking contact, and the loss of his warmth felt like grief. I will find a solution, he said, his voice returning to its usual controlled tenor. Theodore wants to marry Celeste? Fine, but not until Rosewood is secure. Not until you're protected. Not until— He stopped, his jaw working. I won't see you sacrificed for diplomatic convenience. Not again, not by my son and not by me. What are you going to do? What I should have done from the beginning. His expression hardened into something that reminded her why people called him a warrior king. I'm going to make a choice, and God help anyone who tries to stop me. The summons came at dawn, a formal call for the entire court to assemble in the throne room at noon. No explanation, no advance warning, just the king's command carried by riders to every noble house within reach of the capital. By 11, the throne room was packed. Courtiers lined the walls, whispers rising like steam. Theodore stood near the dais, flanked by his mother, both wearing expressions of barely controlled anxiety. Lady Beatrice had secured a position near Marianne, her presence a silent support. Do you know what this is about? The dowager murmured. No. But Marianne's heart hammered with premonition. At precisely noon, the doors opened and King Dominic entered. He wore full regalia, crown, formal robes, the symbols of authority he rarely bothered with. But what struck Marianne wasn't the trappings of power. It was his expression, set, determined, and utterly uncompromising. He ascended the dais and settled into the throne. The whispers died. I have called you here today, he began, his voice, carrying to every corner of the vast room, to address matters of succession, duty, and honor. For weeks, rumors have circulated regarding the betrothal between Crown Prince Theodore and Princess Marianne of Rosewood. Today, I will settle those rumors permanently. Theodore went rigid. Isolde's face paled. The betrothal, Dominic continued, was arranged as a political alliance. Valmont's treasury and military support in exchange for Rosewood's cooperation and resources. It was, by every measure, a practical arrangement that benefited both kingdoms. He paused, his gaze sweeping the assembled courtiers. It was also a mistake. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Not because Princess Marianne is unsuitable. Quite the contrary. In the 2 months she has resided at this court, she has demonstrated intelligence, capability, and courage that would make her an asset to any kingdom. She organized relief efforts that saved hundreds of lives. She commanded respect from officials twice her age. She proved herself a woman of remarkable character. Marianne's throat tightened. Where was he going with this? The mistake, Dominic said, was not in the alliance itself, but in the match. My son does not love Princess Marianne. He has made that abundantly clear through his conduct. And Princess Marianne deserves better than a marriage devoid of respect, companionship, or affection. Father, Theodore started forward, but Dominic raised a hand, silencing him. Therefore, as King of Valmont, I am dissolving the betrothal between Crown Prince Theodore and Princess Marianne, effective immediately. The throne room erupted. Shouts, gasps, a roar of shocked voices. Dominic's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence. The single word, delivered with absolute authority, brought instant quiet. Rosewood will not suffer financially from this decision. The Treasury support will continue. The military alliance remains intact. All benefits negotiated in the original contract will be honored. The only change is the marriage itself. Isolde surged forward. Your Majesty, you cannot simply... I can. I have. It's done. Dominic's attention shifted to Theodore. You are free to marry Lady Celeste, if she'll have you. I give my permission and my blessing. But understand this, Theodore. You have abdicated the right to complain about any decision I make from this moment forward. Is that clear? Theodore looked stunned, relieved, and vaguely guilty all at once. Yes, Father. Good. Dominic rose from the throne, and every eye tracked him as he descended the dais steps. He moved through the crowd with measured purpose, courtiers parting before him like water. He stopped directly in front of Marianne, Princess Marianne of Rosewood. His voice had gentled, but lost none of its strength. You came to Valmont expecting a marriage of convenience. You were treated poorly, dismissed, underestimated. For that, I apologize on behalf of my house and my kingdom. Your Majesty, I'm not finished. A ghost of a smile touched his severe features. You are no longer betrothed to my son. The contracts that bound you are dissolved. You are free to return to Rosewood if you wish. I will provide whatever support your kingdom requires. He paused, and the entire throne room held its breath. Or, Dominic said slowly, clearly, you could stay, as my wife, as Valmont's queen. The words detonated like cannon fire. The throne room erupted again. Shocked exclamations, outraged protests, Lady Beatrice's quietly delighted, "Oh my." Marianne couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what was happening. Dominic knelt. The King of Valmont knelt before her in front of his entire court and took her hand in his. I am 53 years old, Marianne. I have lived through wars, political upheaval, and 30 years of diplomatic marriage. I buried a wife I respected but never loved. I raised a son I love but don't understand. I have spent 5 years telling myself that duty was enough, that I'd had my chance at life and should be content with what remained. His grip on her hand tightened, and then you arrived. Small, stubborn, courageous, honest. You stood in my throne room and defended yourself with more dignity than most nobles manage in a lifetime. You commanded relief efforts with skill that put my advisors to shame. You beat me at chess. Don't deny it. You had me in 3 moves that last game before I distracted you with conversation. Scattered laughter from the crowd. You made me feel alive again, Marianne. Made me remember that life is more than duty and obligation. Made me want... His voice roughened. Made me want to be more than just a king going through motions until death comes to claim me. Marianne's vision blurred with tears. So I'm asking, Dominic said quietly, not as a king making a political proposal, but as a man who has fallen impossibly, inappropriately, completely in love with you. Will you marry me? Not for duty, not for alliance, but because I love you, and I want to spend whatever years I have left making you happy. The throne room had gone utterly silent. Every eye fixed on Marianne, waiting. She looked down at this powerful, controlled, fearsome king kneeling before her. really looked at him, and saw not authority or power, but simply a man offering his heart with both hands. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." Dominic's expression transformed. Genuine joy breaking through decades of careful control. He rose, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her in front of 300 witnesses with a passion that made it abundantly clear this was no political arrangement. When they finally broke apart, cheers had mixed with the shocked whispers. Lady Beatrice was wiping her eyes. Lord Ashford was applauding vigorously. Even some of the more traditionally minded courtiers looked grudgingly approving. Theodore stood, near the dais, looking simultaneously relieved and slightly put out at being upstaged. Lady Celeste had materialized at his elbow, tears streaming down her beautiful face. Only Queen Isolde remained rigid with disapproval, though even she seemed to recognize that the battle was lost. Dominic kept Marianne's hand in his as he addressed the court once more. "The wedding will take place in 1 month. All of Valmont is invited. Princess Marianne will be crowned queen on our wedding day. Anyone who has concerns about this match is welcome to voice them now or remain silent forever." No one spoke. "Excellent." He smiled. Actually smiled, warmth transforming his usually severe features. "Then I suggest you all start planning appropriate celebrations. Valmont is getting a new queen, and I intend to ensure the entire kingdom knows how extraordinary she is." He led Marianne from the throne room, courtiers bowing as they passed, whispers already transforming from shocked to speculative to approving. When they reached the quiet of the gallery outside, Marianne finally found her voice. "You just dissolved your son's betrothal and proposed to his former bride in front of the entire court." "I did. That's going to cause scandal. Undoubtedly. Your mother-in-law hates me now. Isolde will adjust. She always does." Dominic stopped, turning to face her fully. "Marianne, if growing serious." "Marianne, I meant what I said. This isn't duty or convenience. I love you. Desperately, completely. And in ways I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. You've brought light back into a life I thought had gone permanently gray. I love you too," she whispered. "Even though you're stubborn and impossibly controlled and you make me want to shake you sometimes." "Only sometimes?" "Most of the time." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Marianne stopped caring about scandal or propriety or what anyone thought. She was going to marry a king. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And that made all the difference. The month passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Marianne found herself at the center of attention she'd never sought. Courtiers who had dismissed her now sought her favor. Seamstresses competed for the honor of creating her wedding gown, and the kingdom buzzed with excited speculation about their unusual queen-to-be. Through it all, Dominic remained steadfast. He attended every planning meeting, deferred to her preferences, and made it clear that anyone who treated her with anything less than full respect would answer to him personally. Theodore, surprisingly, proved gracious in defeat. He and Lady Celeste announced their own betrothal 2 weeks after Dominic's declaration, and the prince seemed genuinely happy in a way Marianne had never seen before. He even apologized, awkwardly but sincerely, for his earlier behavior. "I was cruel because I was trapped," he'd said during a private conversation. "I took my resentment out on you when the problem was never you at all. For what it's worth, Father chose well. You'll be a remarkable queen." Queen Isolde proved more difficult. She maintained icy courtesy, but made her disapproval clear through 1,000 small slights. Dominic tolerated it for precisely 1 week before summoning his former queen for a private audience that left her pale and silent. Whatever he'd said, Isolde emerged with grudging acceptance, if not enthusiasm. Lady Beatrice, predictably, was delighted. "I knew it from the start," she crowed over tea 3 days before the wedding. "The moment I saw how he looked at you during that garden party. A man doesn't look at a woman like that unless he's already lost. You could have warned me." and spoiled the surprise. Never. The dowager's expression softened. You've done well, child. Better than well. You took an impossible situation and turned it into something beautiful. Your mother would be proud. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, autumn giving way to winter, the air crisp and sharp. Marianne woke to Agnes fussing over her, the wedding gown hanging like a dream-made fabric, and a sense of unreality that made everything feel distant and strange. Nervous? Agnes asked as she fastened pearl buttons. Terrified, Marianne admitted. Not about Dominic, about everything else. I'm about to become queen of one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. I'm 22. I have no royal training. What if I fail? Then you'll learn. Same as you've done with everything else. Agnes's tone was brisk but affectionate. Now stop fidgeting. You're going to wrinkle the silk. The gown was exquisite. White silk embroidered with silver thread, cut to flatter her small frame without attempting to disguise it. A gift from Dominic, who had told the modiste simply to make her look like herself, only more so. The crown they'd crafted for her was smaller than Catherine's had been, more delicate with sapphires instead of diamonds. Dominic had chosen the stones himself, telling her they matched her eyes. The cathedral was packed. Every noble family in Valmont had come, along with representatives from neighboring kingdoms. Marianne processed down the aisle on her father's arm. King Edmund had arrived 3 days prior, looking healthier and more hopeful than she'd seen him in years. You're happy, he'd said the night before. Not a question. An observation. I am. Then I have no regrets. Everything we've endured was worth this moment. At the altar, Dominic waited in formal black and silver, the crown of Valmont on his dark head. When his eyes found hers, everything else faded. The watching court, the elaborate ceremony, the weight of expectation. There was only him and her, and the promise between them. The ceremony was traditional, formal, filled with the ritual words of royal weddings. But when the time came for vows, Dominic took her hands and spoke from the heart rather than the prescribed text. Marianne, I vow to honor you not just as my queen but as my partner, to listen to your counsel, respect your judgment, and trust your strength. I vow to love you fiercely, defend you ruthlessly, and make you laugh even when I'm being impossibly stubborn. I vow to spend every day of whatever life I have left, proving that you chose wisely. There wasn't a dry eye in the cathedral. Marianne's own vows were simpler. Dominic, I vow to stand beside you in all things, to challenge you when you need challenging and support you when you need support, to be honest even when honesty is hard, and kind even when you're being insufferable. I vow to love you for exactly who you are, king, warrior, chess player, and mine. When he kissed her, the cathedral erupted in cheers. The coronation followed immediately. Dominic removing his crown and placing on her head the smaller circlet of sapphires, his voice ringing through the cathedral. I crown you Marianne, Queen of Valmont, partner in rule and life, beloved of my heart. The words echoed off stone walls, and Marianne felt the weight of the crown settle on her head like destiny, finally finding its proper shape. The celebration lasted 3 days. There was a formal banquet where Marianne gave her first speech as queen, brief, warm, promising to serve Valmont with all her heart. There was dancing in the great hall where Dominic waltzed with her for hours, his usually stern expression soft with joy. There were toasts and gifts and endless streams of well-wishers. Through it all, Marianne kept expecting to wake up, to find this was all some elaborate dream. But Dominic's hand in hers remained solid and real. His presence beside her, protective, proud, loving, proved that this impossible thing had actually happened. On their wedding night, in Dominic's private chambers that were now theirs, he dismissed the servants and turned to her with a vulnerability she'd never seen. Are you certain? He asked quietly. About all of this? About me? You're 22, Marianne. I'm 53. I can give you perhaps 20 good years if I'm fortunate. You could have had... She silenced him with a kiss. I don't want anyone else's 40 years. I want your 20. Every day, every moment. Stop trying to talk me out of the best decision I've ever made. I just want you to be happy. Then stop worrying and kiss me. Properly. He did. And Marianne discovered that fairy tales weren't fiction after all, they were just waiting for the right people to live them. 2 years later, active. She's been kicking for the past hour. Marianne guided his hand to where their baby pressed against her skin. Feel that? Wonder crossed his features, the same expression he'd worn when she'd told him she was pregnant 3 months ago. Remarkable. She's strong, like her father. Stubborn like her mother, I expect. He kissed her temple. We received word from Theodore today. He and Celeste are expecting as well, due in winter. That's wonderful. And it was. Theodore had proven to be a good crown prince once released from unwanted obligations. He and Dominic had rebuilt their relationship slowly, carefully, and now maintained a cordial father-son dynamic built on honesty rather than expectation. Also, Lord Ashford wants to know if you'll address the Agricultural Council next month. Something about new irrigation techniques you suggested. I'd love to, as long as I can still see the gardens of Valmont Palace had transformed under Marianne's direction. Where once there had been formal hedges and rigid patterns, now there were winding paths, secluded arbors, and flowers chosen for beauty rather than symmetry. Queen Marianne of Valmont, for she would never grow tired of that title, walked the paths on a late summer evening, one hand resting on her rounded belly, the other holding a book she'd been pretending to read. There you are. Dominic's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. I've been searching everywhere. Agnes said you'd gone for a walk 2 hours ago. I was reading. Time got away from me. She turned, smiling as he approached. 2 years of marriage had only made him more dear. The gray in his hair more pronounced, the lines around his eyes deeper. But the way he looked at her remained unchanged. Like she was the most remarkable thing he'd ever seen. And how is our daughter today? He settled onto the bench beside her, his hand covering hers on her belly. My feet by then. She laughed, looking down at her expanding middle. I may need help getting to the podium. I'll carry you if necessary. Dominic's expression grew serious. Marianne, are you happy, truly? You ask me that at least once a week, and I'll continue asking until I'm certain. Then yes, I'm happy, impossibly completely happy. She leaned against him, feeling his solid strength, his steady heartbeat. I'm married to a man I love who loves me back. I'm doing work that matters. The relief programs we established are being adopted by 3 neighboring kingdoms. I have friends, respect, purpose, and soon I'll have a daughter to raise and probably spoil terribly. Definitely spoil terribly. Dominic agreed. I have a list of inappropriate gifts already prepared. You're going to be an insufferable father. I'm an insufferable husband and king. Why stop there? Marianne laughed, the sound carrying across the gardens. In the distance, she could see the palace, her home now, truly and completely. The place where she'd arrived as a rejected bride and stayed as a beloved queen. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Choosing me over convenience? The scandal took months to die down, not for a moment. Dominic's arms encircled her, careful of her belly. You are the best choice I've ever made. The boldest, the most right, the only one that actually mattered. Everything else, kingdom, crown, duty, means nothing compared to this. To you. As the sun set over Valmont, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Queen Marianne leaned back against her husband's chest and thought about fairy tales. She had arrived at court as a princess, too short to be wanted, too plain to be valued, too insignificant to matter, and she had become a queen. Not because anyone rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself. Because she'd refused to be small even when the world tried to make her so. Because she'd had the courage to reach for more than duty offered. The short princess had been rejected at court, and the Alpha King had made her his only queen. But the truth, Marianne thought as she felt her daughter kick and her husband's arms tighten around her, was even better than the story. She had made herself a queen, and he had been wise enough to notice.